Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I've got a real treat for everybody today. I spoke with her son quite a while ago. It might have been about a year ago, and I'm super excited to have Dolores Gangotena de Diaz. She's the founder of Quasar Expeditions. Dolores, so happy to have you here. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Jason. Likewise, and I'm so glad that I can actually be part of your program.
So am I. When I spoke with your son, you got to talk to my mom. You got to talk to my mom. She's got quite a story. And then we just kind of kept missing each other. And now we finally have connected. So what a treat. And Dolores, you're in Ecuador, right? We're going to discuss quite a bit about that. You're doing some things in other places in South America as well. But so tell me, where do you live?
I live in Quito, Jason. Travel often to the Galapagos, but my parents were born here in Ecuador, so I was born here in Quito, and I am an Ecuadorian and with the love of this country at heart.
Love it. I do as well. As last time we spoke, actually, I can't remember if I was still in Quito or I had just left, but I spent most of the last 4 months in Ecuador and just fell in love with the Quiteños. And just Ecuador as a whole. Did I say it right? It's Quiteños, right? People that live there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it was a beautiful place.
Yeah. So glad that you spent some time in Quito, Jason, because lately, and you know what normally happens throughout the world, the bad news always make first pages and, the good things seldom do. And, because you've been here, how lovely Ecuador is. And on occasion, I feel a bit sorry that people think exclusively about the Galapagos when they think about Ecuador, and they just take a couple of days to visit continental Ecuador. When they take a bit of a longer time to visit continental Ecuador, they just love it. They say, this country really offers everything. So I'm so glad that you're one of those, who enjoy continental Ecuador also.
Oh yeah, it is so cool. I am one of the few maybe gringos, I'm going to use the term gringos, that has visited Ecuador and did not go to Galapagos. And I know I need to. It's a special place. And I just, one of the things I love about that part of the world is just the ability to get on a bus and go just about anywhere you want to go, with a combination of a taxi and a bus, and you can go anywhere. And I enjoyed quite a few day trips and weekends, and I went down to Cuenca. And it is such a beautiful country. Dolores, I want to give our listeners just kind of a quick, what is Quasar Expeditions? And then we're going to go kind of figure out how it all came about. So what's the 30-second elevator pitch for what is Quasar Expeditions?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Actually, Quasar started as a Galapagos operator. And it all started when I was quite young, really. I was only 17 when I went to the Galapagos with a group of friends. At that time, it was 1969. At that time, Galapagos was very little known inside Ecuador, which was amazing. It was better known in England because of Charles Darwin. When the biology teacher started talking to us about what the Galapagos were all about, I just lost my head. And the only thing that I wanted is to go visit. Some 4 friends, myself, convinced the biology teacher to take us to the Galapagos. She was able to convince our parents to allow us to go. At the time, there was no airport, and we just had to take a boat from Guayaquil to the Galapagos. It took almost 3 days to get there, and that's how this affair with the Galapagos started. I lost my head, on my very first trip with the Galapagos, and then some years later, got to marry my husband Eduardo, and by then I had already visited the Galapagos some 5 times. And when we went together to the Galapagos, he was more of a boat lover more than a nature lover. So we had the great combination. He just said, wouldn't it be absolutely beautiful to be able to offer, this experience in a small group to people who really want to enjoy nature? And that was the beginning of Quasar. We just stayed after that trip, which was on board a turn of the century sailboat. At that time, the only boat that was doing some sort of tourism, this was in 1984, was Metropolitan Touring with a big boat called the Inaa. And we went on the sailing boat that the owner was a Galapagueño living in the islands and had no navigational equipment whatsoever. But the experience was just amazing. The captain would just go down underwater, and will come up, with these huge lobsters for us to have lunch. It was amazing, Jason, and that's what really created the interest in us to be able to offer Galapagos for small groups of people. Because as much as the other boat was, for 80 passengers, we just wanted, to be small groups. So that's how it all started. The dream of Quasar started right there.
That's very, very.
Please.
So, Dolores, I can completely imagine how exciting that was for you. Just listening to you, and I've got the ability. I can see your face on the screen as well, and it was lit up, and um, that just left me with so many more questions. But before we do that, just real quick. So, what if you were to meet someone at a, I don't know, a travel conference, trade show or something, and you were to tell them Quasar Expeditions does this, what do you do? What do you want them to know? Basically, what kinds of trips and offerings you have right now?
Okay, actually, Quasar, we identified, Jason, from the very beginning that what we wanted to do is something similar to what you do in a Galapagos safari. We've been seeing, when we created the company, the idea was to replicate what I had experienced on my very first trip to the Galapagos. And not easy to do because the tourism numbers to the islands increased. There were more restrictions concerning itineraries. The national park did not allow, about 10 years from the time that we started the company, 10 years after the Galapagos National Park started putting in place a lot of restrictions, logically, because there were many people visiting the island. So they had to restrict the itineraries to be more careful to the numbers of people visiting each one of the visitor sites. So that actually changed a little bit what we wanted to offer. But somehow, Jason, we were able to create and replicate that very first experience that I had in the Galapagos. And
That's
if
very
you would
cool.
ask me, what does Quasar do? I would say we offer the very best of the nature of the Galapagos. That's what we do. There is nothing that will keep us from showing our guests the very best of the nature. If that means twice the work for our staff, which is absolutely fabulous because they won't stop at anything to show those little extras to our guests. I mean, they
Okay.
will stay longer times during the visits or stay longer during snorkeling, anything that will actually allow our visitors to see the very best of the Galapagos.
Very, very cool. So is 100% of your business Galapagos?
It started that way, Jason. And then because people also wanted to visit continental Ecuador, and no matter what, you need to arrive first to continental Ecuador if you want to travel to the Galapagos. We used a third party to operate those services to our clients. But as time went by, we saw the need to create our own DMC here in Ecuador. And that's how we started offering services in continental Ecuador with the very same philosophy to those services that we offer in the Galapagos. As time went on, former clients of ours who enjoyed what they lived with us in the Galapagos and in continental Ecuador started asking if we would offer something similar in Peru, and also grew to offer services in Peru, and that's how it started. Our DMC started to work to grow. Jason, Fernando. You interviewed him some time ago. He now lives in Chile, and we always, from the very beginning, wanted Quasar to remain a family company.
Hmm.
We've seen so many wonderful tourism operators of the Galapagos and from so many other areas of the world that that have sold their operations, and then those operations become very impersonal. Whereas with Quasar, we have always wanted to keep it very Ecuadorian. There was an occasion when a company that has a great name in the market wanted us to become members so that we will follow their menus. And we just said, no, thank you, because
Yeah.
we want people to enjoy what Ecuador is all about. We want it to be kept in the Ecuadorian hands. And it's the very same thing that we've done in Chile, for example, with the Patagonian safaris that Fernando, my second son, offers. It's the same. Offer Chile at its best, offer Argentina at its best. So, in every country that you will visit with Quasar, you will actually enjoy what is local. That has been probably the reason for our success, Jason. We've tried to keep it as much as possible, Ecuadorian in the Galapagos, Peruvian in Peru, Chilean in Chile. So we've had success doing that.
Yeah, that's very cool because I think travelers value that, or at least some of them do. It's working with a local tour operator and having that flavor, and having been being somebody who's spent time in Ecuador. It's amazing. I mean, the people are it's really really cool, and I appreciate what you're sharing with us. And I'm curious, because you mentioned DMC, so, destination management company. Some of our listeners know what that is, some of them don't. So I'm curious, when you say that you set up a DMC in continental Ecuador to handle, the folks that were coming in and leaving, presumably that started out primarily for, like you said, for your guests that are going to the Galapagos, but maybe they want to do a 3-4 day extension on the mainland. I guess where I'm going with this question is, when you mentioned the DMC, were you working with other tour operators, maybe in the US, that were sending people to Ecuador as well, either for your Galapagos trips or just mainland trips? Or just tell us, I'm just trying to get my head around, were you working mostly directly with consumers, or were you working with travel agents and outbound tour operators in other
Correct,
places?
Jason. Yeah, we actually the guests that we were receiving were coming from either tour operators in the US or travel agencies. At the time, nowadays things have changed a little bit. I do see an increase in the number of travel agencies that work directly with us. Formerly, travel agencies used to contact a tour operator in the United States, which was actually a big tourism operator selling several destinations. And
Hmm.
travel agencies normally contacted them, and that tour operator would organize the trip for their clients. Nowadays, I think it's because of the internet. Travel agencies have more access to see personally and directly through their computers what the services of this and that company are. They tend to contact directly us, the tour operators in each of the countries that they want to send their passengers to.
Okay, gotcha. So do you do direct to consumer? If somebody listening to this wants to go to the Galapagos and they click on the link in our show notes and they go to your website, would they book directly with you, or is
They
that a different
can,
business
yeah.
model?
If they want, they can book directly with us, or they can go to their preferred travel agency or tour operator, if they, just mentioning, I would like to go on board this or that boat, or would like to go to Chile or Peru with Quasar, they will, they will send the client to us.
You're very, very, very smart woman. I really appreciate what you just said, because your relationships with the tour operators in the US or the Europe and travel agents is obviously is a very important thing for you. So for you to come on the show and say, "Oh yeah, you should book direct, definitely book direct," that could have a negative impact on your relationships with them. So I appreciate that you say no. If you've got a favorite travel agent or a tour operator back home, just tell them that you want to go with Quasar. That
Yeah.
that'd be really cool.
Absolutely. And I tell you, it's, throughout the years, Jason, those travel agencies, those tour operators become your friends.
Yeah.
They have been part of the business for years and years and years. And I would say they enjoy working with us because also what we've done from the very beginning is we decided to target exclusively the English speaking market. At the beginning of our operation, I remember we used to attend ITB, which is a big travel show in Germany. Actually went on board small boats. I mean, and not the boats small per se, but the number of passengers. It became, that the Germans were on one side, the Americans were on the other side, and they, that relationship that you get to have with your with the other guests was
Mm-hmm.
non-existent. So we said we need to make up our minds, and that's when we decided we'll just target to the English-speaking market. And nowadays, all of our cruises are exclusively English for English-speaking passengers, and it works incredibly well because part of the experience for those staying 7 nights on a boat, it's the friends that you make when you're there. I mean, being with
Mm-hmm.
someone on a close relationship, having the meals at the same time with your other guests, friendships start. And one of the comments that we constantly get from our guests is, I made these friends and now we travel all over the world with them. We visit their homes. It's a relationship starts, which is one of the great things that happen when you go on a cruise with us.
Completely relate to when you say, well, we used to have, half the boat, maybe it'd be German, the other half's English speaking. And I can relate to that, but I also realize someone might be listening to this. Oh, it sounds kind of snobbish or kind of like, well, we don't want those Germans because Germans are weird or anything like that. But I don't think it's about that. So I want to dig a little deeper into that. If a German person wanted to book, but they understood everything was in English, all of the guides were English speaking, everything was in English. Does that change things, or do you just say no,
No,
you can't come?
actually, welcome. Absolutely welcome. I mean, we have passengers from all over. The only thing, Jason, and it doesn't matter if there are some Italian agencies listening to me right now, the only nationality that we actually force them to get charters is Italians because
Really?
they're never on time. So everyone is ready to disembark for the morning walk, and the Italians are just finishing up breakfast and they're talking. So it's a mess. So whenever we have Italian clients, if it's only a couple of them, it works well with the rest of the group. But if it's a group of Italians, it's a mess. So that's, we tell the agencies, fabulous, but get a charter. I mean, get enough passengers to fill up the boat, and then they can have the time of their lives.
Does it still present challenges? Like, let's say you've got a charter with a bunch of Italians. My limited understanding of the Galapagos is there are certain things that have to happen on schedule, regardless of whether you chartered the boat or not. Is that
Correct.
true, or am I wrong? I mean, does it still
No,
present
it is
challenges?
true. Even though, Jason, when you go with a small group of guests, you can actually work a little bit about, around the times. For example, on occasion when it's extremely hot, for example, the months of January, February, which the Galapagos becomes very hot, what we do is we bring down passengers to the visits at around 7 in the morning, and then by 9:30, 10, they've already done the morning visit, and then we take them snorkeling. So we work around the times. You cannot do that on a bigger boat because there are too many guests and it's impossible to be flexible in that respect. But yes, for example, 6:15 in the evening, nobody can remain on the islands, on the visited sites by national park restrictions. By then, everybody should be back on board.
Okay, gotcha. I could just keep going with this conversation because I'm fascinated by this, but I really want to make sure we don't get to the very end of the conversation and then I say, Dolores, tell me about your childhood. So I feel like I can't wait any longer. So we're going to go back because what I remember you said you were like 17, you took your first trip out there, you
Correct.
got on a boat, right? So like what was happening in your world that you mentioned your teachers started talking about it, you became fascinated, but like were your parents supportive of
Absolutely.
this? What I mean, did they encourage you to be the explorer type or what was childhood like?
Actually, Jason, well, as you can see, I'm not extremely young. So at those times, especially being a girl, a woman, 17, parents were extremely careful of where you went. And I tell you, if it wouldn't have been because she was really a lovely lady, if it wouldn't have been because she actually talked to them and came with us to the Galapagos, I'm sure they wouldn't have allowed me to go there because Jason, the boat I went on was a Navy boat. Actually,
I had heard that. I remember your son telling me. That's
it
part of why I
was
want to
an
get back to
old
this.
thing. It was really the most comfortable boat that you can imagine. But it was the only vessel going to the islands. As I mentioned, was no airport at the time in the Galapagos, so there were no tourism. Actually, metropolitan touring started 3 years after my very first trip to the Galapagos with the big boat. So it was remote and you had to go on this boat for the 3 days, nothing to do on board. Nevertheless, we had fun. That boat was carrying dry goods for the inhabitants of the Galapagos, which at the time must have been 3,000 people, no more than that, living in the islands. But this boat took rice and sugar and dry goods that they needed in the islands.
You mentioned a woman that went with you. I wasn't clear. Was that you
She
said your
was my
mother
teacher.
spoke
She
your
was the
teacher,
teacher.
so
Yeah,
the
she
teacher
was the
took you.
biology teacher who actually she was also so keen, in going to the Galapagos because she hadn't been there.
She hadn't been either.
She saw
So
an
was it
opportunity, to come with us and to get to the Galapagos, for the first time. It was fabulous, Jason. It was truly fabulous.
how many students?
It was actually five of us and the teacher. And I tell you, at the time, there were no guides or anything. Actually, this boat just brought us down on these wooden dinghies to the island, and they would say, okay, we'll pick you up at 4 in the afternoon. And, they kept busy bringing dry goods down and we just walked all over. It was amazing. My first encounter, Jason, with the Galapagos wildlife was the first island that we actually visited was San Cristobal. We arrived, and when we were on board the wooden dinghy to get down to the island, a sea lion literally jumped into the dinghy, and we were just terrified. And the sailor just said, "Don't worry, they're tame." And that was my first encounter. And to tell you the truth, the reason why I fell in love with the islands from the very beginning, it was extraordinary, really, how fantastic the wildlife of the Galapagos is and was. Nowadays, it is not, they're not as curious of you as you are of them. At that time, the iguanas will just come onto you. The sailors, which were actually the only ones visiting the Galapagos then, bringing goods, taught the iguanas to eat oranges. So the iguanas would just come running towards you so that you would feed them oranges. And it was scary at the beginning, but they wanted, they meant no harm. They just wanted the oranges. The birds would just be on top of your shoulders, on your head. Nowadays, it doesn't happen that much. The wildlife does not move or go away from you. but it's not as friendly as I would say as it was at those times.
I'm imagining that that's because the park system, the government, somebody said quit feeding oranges to the iguanas, so the iguanas quit running over to you. That's what I'm imagining.
Absolutely,
Is that the case?
absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Probably, sadly, I say probably we killed a few of them because afterwards these poor iguanas probably didn't want the fruit of the cactus. They just wanted the oranges, which is something that right now that there is a national park and a Charles Darwin station that really collaborates with the park on this respect. They actually limit the access that tourists have to the wildlife. I mean, you have to keep away at least 3 feet from the wildlife because they don't move. You have to
Mm-hmm.
move, Jason,
Mm-hmm.
to go around them. So that's the beauty of the Galapagos, and we have to be respectful of their
Yeah.
space.
Yeah. Yep. So the group of, you said it was 5 students and the teacher. For how long? How long was the trip from the time you left the mainland until you
21
got back?
days. It was 21 days, Jason, and the cost was 1,200 sucres. On dollars nowadays, probably $22.
Oh my gosh. I
21
mean,
days. Well, there were non-existent services, mind you.
well, yeah.
We just had one cabin that originally was one of those crew cabins for the sailors of the boat, so that it was upper and lowers, and
Mm-hmm.
the 6 of us just remained on that cabin. There was just one bathroom for us, which the crew shared, did not share with us. Normally they would share that bathroom, but they allowed us to use it exclusively. And for meals, there was nothing but lentils and rice. So the value of the trip was the absolute freedom that we had whenever we went down to the islands. It was just you go, you explore, you swim, you do whatever you want. It was fantastic.
Do as I listen to you share this story, I'm thinking that has to be the best field trip, if you want to call it a field trip. Are you familiar with the term field
Indeed,
trip, or is that
yes.
a US thing? Like that has to be like the best field trip or high school like outing, class outing that like in the history of the earth.
Absolutely, Jason. I mean, it was so much so that it changed my life.
Yeah, we're going to the Galapagos for our field trip, and nobody knows where it is, and we're going to take a boat for 3 days to get there. I mean, just everything about what you're describing is just like so cool.
It was, and I tell you that, that trip changed my life to the point that
Yeah.
my life since then has been linked to the Galapagos.
Are you still in touch with any of the other students that went on, or do you have any
Yes,
idea if any of them
all of
went
the,
into this
actually,
business as well?
somehow because of how close I am to the Galapagos, I am the one that reminds them often of what's happened. Actually, some 7 years ago, I invited a couple of them, to go, and we remembered, how where we how we walked, what we did at those times. So we had a fabulous time. Unfortunately, the other three are not that great physically, so Galapagos is sort of a not demanding, but you need to be physically well to really be able to enjoy it
Mm-hmm.
because there's lots of walks, on top lava rock, is a jagged terrain, and there's lots of snorkeling. So it's really a physically sort of demanding destination.
So anybody listening to this, the time is now. Don't wait.
Absolutely.
If you're still
I mean,
able to do it.
even though, we've had passengers who, whose dream of their lives was to visit the Galapagos. We had this wonderful lady who had muscle atrophy. I'm sorry,
Mm-hmm.
the pronunciation. And she knew that she had only, some, short time. And she came to the Galapagos, and the crew members helped her all of the time. She couldn't go to some of the visits, but she did enjoy enormously the snorkeling. Jason, the letter that she sent afterwards, it's, these are the sort of reaction from our guests that fill our lives. It makes it all worth it because, believe me, it's been 40 years of operating when there was nobody in the Galapagos, when we had to deal Saturdays, Sundays with radios because there were no telephones there. Any sort of problems, we had to deal with them. Very few crew members to choose from because keep in mind on islands that the population 3,000, try and find a good skipper, a good engineer. That was really something difficult. But we made it, and so it makes it so worthwhile when we receive these comments that people really enjoyed what we've done for them.
It's very cool. One of the things you mentioned, you said it's hard to find a good skipper or a good engineer. I heard you put the word good in front of both of those.
Yeah,
And the reason I want to ask this, or what came up for me, is I remember I worked in Belize for a while, and we worked on an island 30 miles offshore, and we'd come in. Nobody really lived on the island, but when we'd come into town, there'd always be people at the dock, and they'd say, "Oh, I'm looking for work. Do you have any work for me, boss?" That's just the way they talk. "Do you have any work for me, boss?" And I'm like, "What do you do?" "Well, I can do anything." So like if
very similar, Jason.
I need a mechanic. "Oh, I can do that." "I need a
Yeah,
fishing guide." "Oh, I can do that." "I need a landscaper." "I can do that." So that was the
it was
question I had for you. Is it the same way? They can.
absolutely. Believe me, the first 10 years since we started the operation, that was it. I
Yeah.
mean, we became schools for the crew members that we had. We needed to teach them, how to do things because, as you say, and I remember clearly now, it was a Sunday and we received a radio call because there were no telephones. Quito, Quito, Puerto Ayora, over. Quito, Quito, Puerto Ayora, over. One of our boats entered Puerto Ayora on that Sunday, and I remember David, who was in Galapagos, says, the cook, because chefs were non-existent then, the cook just disembarked, and he says he doesn't want to go on, and we had passengers on board, Jason. David, go all over town and find a replacement. Not 3 hours later, Quito, Quito, Puerto Ayora. Go on, David. He says, I found a mechanic, well, a mechanic between quotes, that says that he knows how to cook. Put him on. And that's how we ended up the cruise, with this guy cooking for the passengers. But I have to admit, at those times, passengers actually realized how difficult and how remote the Galapagos were. So they just enjoyed because, as I mentioned with the first trip with Eduardo, getting fresh lobster was no problem, fresh fish at all times. So that really made the experience so much better for the guests. But that's how we operated at the beginning. As time went on, and there more operators started to have businesses in the islands, then people from continental Ecuador started going. So you could hire people who actually knew their jobs a lot better than those living in the Galapagos.
So that's something you brought up. My understanding is, even if you live in Ecuador, you can't just move to the Galapagos. You can't just move out
Correct.
there and live there. But I'm curious, can you go out and be there temporarily for work? I mean, can you hire, if you met somebody in Quito that was a great chef, could you hire them to work on the boats?
Absolutely. Now you can, Jason, but they need to go with a contract. You need to actually have a legally bind contract of the company with this person. And when the contract is finished, or if that person doesn't want to keep on working, they have to return to the continent.
Okay.
That is it, so that the population of the islands does not grow to limits that is not feasible because the Galapagos do not have enough fresh water. They are now working on putting water makers for the population of the Galapagos. But nevertheless, even the food has to be transported from the continent to the Galapagos. So it's
Right.
difficult when the population grows without planning.
So what about this? So like when I lived in Belize and managed a lodge there, if I wanted to hire someone from outside of Belize, I had to go through a long process, work permits. I had to show that There was nobody in Belize that could do the job, weird stuff. So are you supposed to hire local? What do you call somebody who lives in the Galapagos? Galapageno. So are you supposed to hire a Galapageno first? Do they have priority?
Absolutely.
Okay, but
Actually,
if
you need
you
to prove that the knowledge you need from the person you're going to hire is not available in the
available on
Galapagos
the islands.
with the Galapageños. So that is when you can hire someone from continental Ecuador.
Okay. Here's another. I'm just curious because the other thing that I remember from Belize and other places I've been, most people in Belize, it's part of Central America, as you know, but it's also a Caribbean, more of a Caribbean nation. It's the most Caribbean nation in all of Latin America. But well, I don't know if that's an accurate statement. But anyway, my point is a lot of the people there do not like the water. Like they have no interest in being on a boat, even though it's coastal. They don't mind going to the beach, but they aren't going to get on a boat to go to work. So, are there people, Galapagenos, who don't want to get on a boat?
Absolutely. I mean, we just had once a bartender who got so seasick, Jason, that we need to change the itinerary to just drop him in port because it was so. There are indeed. And there are people who just do not enjoy the water, do not enjoy boats. You know, a few of them really have no problems and they actually they enjoy working on board, but some others really that you cannot. So all of that makes it feasible for people from continental Ecuador to be able to find jobs in the Galapagos.
Okay, you just have to be willing to get on a boat, and then you've got half the
Absolutely.
Galapagenos.
Absolutely.
It's such a strange thing to for those of I didn't grow up on the ocean. I grew up in the mountains of Wyoming, so I had no concept. But when I went to a coastal country or spent time on an island with people that didn't like the water, I just, how do you do that? That's like growing up in the mountains of Wyoming and saying, I don't like driving. I don't know. It's just, but
Right.
anyway.
What we've done in the past years, being in the Galapagos for so long, what we've done, Jason, it's we started to work already about 15 years ago with the schools in the Galapagos. And then we created, for example, the culinary school in Galapagos for those who just may not want to go on board. They are trained well enough so that they can go on board as chefs. But those who just do not want to be on board, they make special sauces that then they freeze and then they sell for the boat so that the chefs on board don't have to be doing the small work, the cutting, the slicing. They do, and they make a living out of that. So it's great, for example, making bread, and they actually sell it to the boats frozen. So it works very well. So those who just that is to avoid them going into sort of illegal fishing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they go into illegal activities that there is no need if they can have some income out of their own work.
A legitimate job. So I get the suspicion, especially after speaking with some Ecuadorians when I was there, that there's kind of two tourism markets or two tourism worlds in the Galapagos. There's the one that you and I are discussing that are English speakers, probably from the United States, the UK, other places in the world, that I'm going to say save up their pennies, but I think it's more expensive than that. So they go on these trips on these really nice boats, and there's probably a wide range. But then I believe you've also got people that live in Ecuador or maybe other parts in Latin America that will just buy a plane ticket to go over to San Cristobal. And I looked at Airbnbs. Honestly, I was looking at Airbnbs there. I was like, wow, there's Airbnbs there that aren't really any more expensive than they were in Quito, which kind of surprised me. And someone was saying, oh yeah, you can just go out there and you can do a day tour or you can walk around and you can still have a nice experience without getting on one of the boats. So I just wanted to bring that up
Yeah,
and
yeah, it's
ask you,
absolutely that's
tell me more
that.
about that.
Yeah, that's it, Jason. You're totally right. Actually, that is an area that needs to be controlled because what has happened lately is people who live in the Galapagos, they have their houses and they just build a couple of extra rooms and then they put them for rent. And that way, not even the national park has the real numbers of how many people end up going to the Galapagos. So it needs to be regulated because you can indeed go to the Galapagos. Let's say you get seasick, which in a way I think it's sort of ridiculous because if you go on day trips, you are going to be on a boat no matter what, going from
Okay.
one
I was
island to the
curious about that.
other. So whenever people say I get extremely seasick, so I want to stay on land, I tell them be careful because that also means you're going to be on board a boat for a few hours, going in and out
Probably
to the islands.
a smaller boat, longer amount
Smaller
of
boats,
time.
which on
Yeah.
occasion even rock more than the larger boats. So that is something that whoever is interested in going to the Galapagos has to keep in mind. But again, getting back to authorities and controls, it needs to be controlled, Jason. And right now, all flashes are now on these because the Galapagos received in 2024 about almost 330,000 visitors. And I have to admit, Jason,
330,000?
and I have to admit that the Galapagos doesn't have the infrastructure, and I mean infrastructure concerning potable water, electricity. Keep in mind that still the Galapagos electricity is, it's done via generators that work with diesel, so it's polluting. So the restrictions are there. Nevertheless, the need to grow hotels, services, and so on, it's there because actually the demand it's there. So the national park and the minister of the environment do have to work on this. They have to control it. They have to put a limit. They have to actually check all properties that are listed for Airbnb or hotels or what hostels, name it, whatever you name it. But it has to be controlled and the numbers have to be kept in check.
How do you balance? So if you're selling high end experiences in the Galapagos, how do you balance that with other people, Ecuadorians? Well, here's what I'm thinking. I suspect the government's in a tough spot because if they say to the Ecuadorians, hey, we're going to charge you a bunch more, we're going to limit, we're going to remove the Airbnb options, whatever, we're going to do whatever it is to lower the numbers of Ecuadorians, but we're still going to let the rich Americans come in.
Right.
That could be a real political issue. I don't know if you want to share any thoughts on that or if we should move on to the next topic, because I can imagine that's a challenge because you're Ecuadorian.
Absolutely, Jason. And, as much as, you feel this belongs to Ecuador and Ecuadorians should have access to the Galapagos anytime they want, let's face it, similar to what happens in Africa, visiting a national park that does have a limit of resources, it costs. And, the only way to sort of limit it, I think it's raising the cost, raising the price of the entrance to the Galapagos National Park.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like unfair because I know many Ecuadorians will not have the possibility to visit the Galapagos, or might be they decide to just save and go and visit the islands. Galapagos is fragile, without a doubt. When you go and visit and go into the visitor sites, it's not big, Jason.
Yeah.
As much as it looks big in the map, but the Galapagos are islands that have the visitor size are limited in space. So you need to control it somehow to avoid damaging the wildlife.
I think, just from a basic economic standpoint, the way to limit the consumption of something is to raise the price. It's anything,
Absolutely.
right? That could be, well, we don't have very much of this. And if we don't let the market adjust the price, then we're just going to run out or we're going to overuse the resource. A good example of one way is to just raise the rates. It's probably the fairest way, I guess. But some people wouldn't think that. But then there's also I grew up in Wyoming where we have hunting and we might say, well, there's limited number of elk. There's more people that want to go elk hunting than we can sustain. So instead of raising the prices to go elk hunting, they set up a lottery system where every year you could put in for a permit. They would, if 3,000 people put in and they only had 500, they would just pick 500 people. And then each year you would just put in a permit. Is that something like somebody that lived in Ecuador that really wanted to go to Galapagos? Is that something they even discuss as some sort of like lottery type system, or has that come up?
Yeah, actually, Jason, there's been several discussions of how to be able to sustain the Galapagos as they are. And lately, raising the price of getting into the national park was discussed. They didn't go far because in Galapagos, people who live in islands have, don't take it wrong, have sort of a limited mentality. For them,
Mm-hmm.
the countries, the islands, and they actually say, you cannot raise this price because then we will stay without any tourists, because there are several people in the Galapagos who actually live out the tourism generated from continental Ecuador, and I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree with that. But there has to be a limitation, and the very first thing is to limit the number, of hotel rooms that are offered in the Galapagos, being these, hotels, hostelries, Airbnb, whatever. It has to be limited. That
Mm-hmm.
way, that if you wanted to go to the Galapagos, if the limit of visitors is 300,000, well, those people will have to pay a little bit more if they want to go and visit.
Just
The
because the
only way
room,
to control it.
maybe the price of entrance isn't as high, but if there's fewer rooms, then the room rates will be higher.
Absolutely.
So that limits the number of people coming in, but also it increases the expense, and that's going to upset some people. So it's a tough thing. I'm happy I
Yeah,
don't
it
have
is
to make any
truly,
decisions like that.
it is so tough that it even sounds a bit unfair. Why is it that the people with money are able to visit these paradise, and why those who don't have it cannot visit? Unfortunately, the world is not very fair in that respect, Jason.
Yeah, we live in a world of scarce resources, and yeah, that's a bit of a challenge. So I did want to ask. I know we keep going back. Your story is so fascinating. This field trip just blows my mind. I just
No, no,
can't
that was
imagine.
really, and
You
I
know,
tell you, it was spectacular.
you know that you know
Yeah.
it's cool. I wonder. I mean, you grow. You're from Ecuador, but you're also very worldly, and you've been doing this a long time. But just the average person, well, I don't know. Me growing up in the U.S., like the idea of getting on a boat for 3 days and going to the Galapagos at 17, when it's really, really cool. So, but I did want to ask you before I forget, do you have siblings? Were there other siblings in your family at the time, brothers and sisters that either went with you or were pissed off that they didn't get to go or weren't interested, or how did that all shake out?
Indeed. When all of them really wanted to get to see the Galapagos after I told them about my experience. But for one or another reason, they just didn't get to go until we had a trimaran at the time. And this must have been Quasar. Actually, we started Quasar around 1984 when we started looking at the permits and how to operate. And the first boat arrived to the Galapagos in 1986, Jason. And as time went on, Eduardo met this British couple who lived in British Virgin Islands, and they had two trimarans that offered diving in British Virgin Islands, and we knew Galapagos was going to be the dive destination, for the next years. So they said they came to the Galapagos and they said, "Wow, this is really the place. So why don't we go into a partnership and we bring one of those catamarans, which was the Lamerlo, and we operate dive cruises in the Galapagos." So we bought the dive permit for the Galapagos, and they brought in the Lamelo, and it was a lovely boat. And it was then also that Eduardo and myself learned to dive, because we said, how can we sell diving without knowing? It was the most amazing thing, Jason,
That sounds like
because
a pretty good excuse to learn how to dive. You're like, well, we
indeed,
need to learn how to dive.
indeed it was. And they actually brought the boat on board there was a dive instructor who was just fabulous. His instructions were so easy to follow, a great teacher. So I would say Quasar also started the real, dive excursions in the Galapagos through these partners of ours who knew so much about diving and safety and equipment and all of that. And on that boat, when it was 1992, that Eduardo and myself said, why don't we invite the family? And all of my brothers and sisters came on board. They had the time of their lives.
But it was the first time for your siblings to go?
Indeed, indeed.
Wow. You were just
Jason,
doing
as
your
I
own
was
thing,
telling
weren't you?
you, Galapagos was almost not known here in continental Ecuador. I mean,
I,
for Ecuadorians, the Galapagos was, oh, yes, it's there, something about Charles Darwin. But even in schools, Galapagos was not given the importance that it has. I mean, I think to me, it was the biology teacher who actually also had a passion for what she had read about the Galapagos that actually drove us and to go to the islands because nobody else visited. As years went by, then it became more popular, and people, Ecuadorians started going to the islands. But at the beginning, it was just foreigners.
it's interesting. Like your teacher, I'm imagining your teacher's like, I want to go. I need to figure out a way to go. She's smart, kind of like a tour operator. Like, I really want to go, so I need to find some people to go with me that would make it make sense. Maybe the school would help out, make it happen, or she could at least, instead of just her showing up and saying, hey, can I get on the boat and go? She could say, hey, I've got some students here. They all pitched in $22 or whatever it was. So we can go. So she kind of was doing the fam trip like a lot of tour operators do, right?
Yeah,
Someone says, hey, if you get
it
five
was
or six
fantastic.
people, you can come and stay for free.
Yeah. And mind you, she was also quite, she loved adventure because we had no idea what we were going on. Actually, we arrived to Guayaquil, and when we saw the boat, we said, hey, is this on board? It's on board this thing that we're going. We were a bit scared at the beginning, but as time, as the days went on, we were comfortable on board that boat. It was truly, it was on the verge of collapsing, that boat, to the point, Jason, that 2 years after we took the trip, it sank. So you can have an idea. You can have an idea of the shape of the boat. But it was the only way to get there. And I don't regret it a bit. It was the most incredible experience of my life.
You mentioned that you ate a lot of lentils, and was it lentils and rice?
Lentils and rice. Mind you, but when we arrived to Puerto Vaquerizo, we passed by, there was truly two chairs and a table. And we said, do you serve food here? And they said, yes, we can prepare something for you. Jason, they prepared the lobster ceviche, the most delicious thing that I've had in my life. And it was actually a big plate, and it costed us 80 cents of azucre, of
Yeah.
azucre. You know what 5 cents of a dollar? Yeah, it was, those were the days, really. It was amazing. But Galapagos keeps on being as wonderful as it used to be. There is more people being in the islands. Things have to be controlled. I would say that the towns are just sort of growing too much. It needs restrictions. Now, going to the negative part of the growth that the Galapagos has had. For example, there is no regulation for taxis. So taxis will just remain day long going around and around looking for clients. And I've told the mayor, why don't you put in the corners a little telephone so that actually you could call if you need a taxi and you avoid these, fuel consumption, pollution, everything that a taxi causes going on and on. And those are things, unfortunately, that need to be placed as restrictions that you cannot break, Jason. Because, yes, it's easy for them to go around and around, but it's a national park and we really need to take care of it. There is also the need to emphasize on what authorities tell people who go and live in the Galapagos. For example, let's say that Jason Elkins is living in the Galapagos. If you have a daughter, you have the right to take her from the continent to the Galapagos. Well, that daughter should go through, a class, name it whatever, in which they would tell you why is it that the Galapagos are important, why is it that you cannot do this and that, why is it, so that people really learn what the Galapagos are all about, because
to be a
you
good
find
citizen.
many people living in the islands who are not very aware of the importance of the Galapagos.
So, all this being said, the listener that's listening to this, perhaps, how do we convey to them that they don't need to feel guilty about going to the Galapagos? Because they could be interpreting what we're hearing as, oh, there's too many people, or there needs to be more control, or they may be hearing this. I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but
Mhm.
if they're hearing that, what do you want to say to the person in Des Moines, Iowa that's listening to this, that's thinking about it, booking a Galapagos trip next year? Should they be concerned? Should they feel guilty? Are they contributing to problems? Or what would you want to say to them?
Yeah, not at all, Jason. I think, whoever plans to visit with Quasar the Galapagos or with similar sort of operators should not feel guilty, because we do pay a lot of taxes to keep the Galapagos pristine. Not only that, we have a group of Galapagos operators who are working in the social areas of the islands. As I mentioned, we have, the schools. We help, even children. We help them, taking them on board so that they can actually find, an activity that when they grow up, they will be able to work on. Um, the entrance to the Galapagos National Park, 45% of that money goes immediately to the national park and the Charles Darwin Station. The expensive way of traveling the Galapagos does help enormously to keep the Galapagos pristine. You're talking about hiring biologists, who do studies of the water. The Charles Darwin Foundation, with all of the staff that they have, are constantly working on how to improve and avoid damages to the islands. So I would say the tourism that pays well, it's really welcome to the Galapagos, because through whatever they pay, they're really sending that money to all of the branches that Galapagos need to be kept pristine.
So they can feel good about it. That's good.
Indeed, indeed. And they
This
can
is
actually, and when they are on board, if they want to go visit any of the initiatives that we have for education, for work, for, they're glad. We tell the naturalists, tell the guests, if they want to go and visit, we gladly take them and visit. So they, on occasion, they say,
see
oh,
where their
I would like to
dollars are
donate
going.
in the future. Yes. And, people feel good about it.
Yeah. This is sometimes a touchy thing that maybe you don't want to share, but you've been in this business long enough, and the Galapagos is an interesting place that is quite different than most places people travel. And what I've noticed is when people go into new environments that they're not familiar with, they sometimes ask questions that seem very silly to the person that's hosting them. So I guess the question is there one or two or three typical questions that people ask about the Galapagos that is a good question because they don't know the answer, but to you or your team are like, oh my gosh, why do people keep asking this? Why are people so dumb? This is the dumb question. What dumb questions? I hate the word dumb because there's no such thing as a dumb question, but what's the question that people often ask so that when someone's listening to this, they can make sure that when they go to the Galapagos, they don't ask that same dumb question?
Yeah, it's actually most of the questions, which are not at all dumb, Jason, but
I
that
agree.
are repeated constantly, are things that the naturalists do explain about. For example, why do I need to wash the sole of my shoes when I finish up a visit to certain island? It's because you don't want to carry seeds of plants from that island to the other island, which, as I can tell you, it's not at all silly. It's
Mm-hmm.
they want to know the answer. So
Mm-hmm.
our naturalists, and that is why, Jason, we never actually have the same naturalist for longer than 15 days on the cruises. It's because it's true. They rest 15 days and then 15 days on board because you need to be open. If you've been working as a naturalist guide for 15 years, yes, you might say, oh my God, once again, the question. But if you're rested, you realize it's a logical question. These people, it's like I'm going to New York and I say, listen, how do I go to the whatever building,
Times Square.
the
Times Square.
Times
That's
Square, for
probably the one
example? Oh
people.
my God, it's not a damn question. I don't know it. So I would say that it's mainly to avoid, that passengers get that feeling. That's what we do with the naturalists, and I tell you, it works well because the
I think
naturalists,
that's very smart.
yeah, they are a wealth of knowledge. The constant comments we get from our guests is, "Wow, the naturalists! I learned everything that I wanted to learn and more from them. They never get tired of explaining, of repeating. It's like being in a classroom, Jason. We all repeat. You might be looking at a bird, and then the naturalist was explaining about the iguana, and you didn't hear. Can you please repeat? The naturalist repeats it with no problem. It's
But you're
just
right.
we're all human. Period.
We're all human. So maybe that question about why do I need to wash off my shoes? Maybe on day 13 or day 14 of the naturalist's uh, cycle, he's like, oh, well, so we don't spread seeds or, this or that. We want to, keep the islands pristine. And if they've been doing it for 30 days in a row, it might just be because I told you to. Why do I need to wash my shoes? Because I said so. Or because
Yeah,
you don't want to kill all these animals out here, do you? So
exactly.
people
You could
people need a
actually
break.
tell them that way. Those are things that, and they explain it in a good way.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Really, it's a great relationship, the one that after the cruise, the naturalists, they receive letters from the guests.
Mm-hmm.
They really thank them for sharing all of their knowledge with them. It's a lovely experience, the one in the Galapagos, because it's friendly. It's lots of wildlife. It's sharing. It's really, I cannot explain it. The food is great, fresh fish, beautiful ocean. You should come, Jason.
Well,
You
I
really
was
should
just
come.
sitting here. I was sitting here thinking, I wonder when you're doing your next fam trip for podcast hosts.
Yeah, actually, count with it.
Sign me up.
Yeah, count with it, Jason. And actually, something that people who are listening to this might be interested in. Quasar is bringing in March 2026 the very first hybrid boat that it's going to operate in the Galapagos.
Yeah,
We
you
are
mentioned that the last
extremely
time we
proud
spoke.
about
That's
that,
yeah.
Jason. Yes. So, I know that we're going to be the first ones having a boat like this. We know the complications that on occasion on a remote place that we can have with all of the technical parts of operating a hybrid boat. Nevertheless, we do hope it's going to be an example for other operators, and hopefully in the future, every operator will be running boats that are hybrid.
It's kind of like, I guess an analogy is maybe you live in a small town somewhere and you go buy a hybrid car or an electric car before they have any chargers in town,
Yeah,
because you're like, okay, this is the way I believe, this is aligned with my beliefs that I believe that we need to be doing this. So I am going to buy the electric car and have them bring it to me in my town where they don't have any electric chargers because I believe that other people will follow my lead, do the same, and then eventually someone will come in and put in a charging station. That's kind of
absolutely,
what you're
Jason.
doing, isn't it?
Yeah. That is our
Yeah,
plan. That is our
that's our.
plan because
You're
at
leading.
this moment, exactly, it's going to self generate the energy. Actually, the generators are going to fill up the batteries. But in future, that's the idea, that the national park will be able to put chargers in the ports so that the most operators actually change and move to these sort of energy-driven boats. That would be the ideal end to a national park like the Galapagos.
Boy, it's a lot of moving parts because I remember you discussing, the electricity out there currently is being made by generators.
Indeed,
And then
indeed.
there's a whole conversation about renewable energy and this and that. It's a sunny place. Galapagos is pretty sunny, but I don't know if they want to put a bunch of solar panels out there.
Yeah. No, what Galapagos needs also, Jason, it's in, actually investment in ways to create energy without using fossil fuels. And you can
Hmm.
use the energy of the sea, you can use the energy of the wind. And that is something that we need to concentrate more on so that, most of the energy that Galapagos needs to keep the people living there and everything else that it's needed, it's actually generated by non-contamination, by not contaminated sources. That would be
Hmm.
ideal, really.
Yeah, because there's pretty strong sea currents out around there. My
Indeed,
understanding of part of
indeed,
why the
and also
diving is so
very
amazing
strong
is because
wind.
of these currents.
Yeah, in the northern part of Baltra, where the airport is located, the wind is very strong. So actually, you could have there, eolic energy being created and then brought to town. At this moment, there are, I think, only about three of them. The thing is a little bit lack of funds, but I also think, if a big company would like to get involved into entering these sources of energy, that would be absolutely
Well,
incredible.
that's the thing, right now, if the energy they're trying to create is just for the local people that live there, and the boats aren't really relying on it anyway. All the people paying all this money to come spend these vacations in the Galapagos on these boats, you can't follow the money. The money, like maybe Charles Darwin Research Station's getting funded, maybe all these different projects are getting funded, but maybe not projects to create a bunch of electricity. Where if the boats start to operate with hybrid boats or electric boats, then all of a sudden that shifts things around where money could be freed up to support that stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's been fun chatting with you. Dolores, we've discussed a bunch of things, and I want to be respectful of your time as well. What else? What else? What did I forget to ask you? What do you want to make sure that our listeners know about you, Quasar, Galapagos, Latin America, life in general, or anything like that before we wrap up?
Yeah, actually, I would tell to those who are actually looking and listening to this interview that Latin America is really a place that, number one, it's very close to the United States. Number two, it has so many wonderful areas that are yet to be opened. That if you get tired of the hordes of people visiting Europe, Latin America is still quite attractive in that respect. There are thousands of people visiting beautiful natural areas. It might, in a way, people find themselves being detracted from the interest of traveling to Latin America because of news that it's violent. But mind you, the whole world is violent at this moment. And if you travel with a good operator, name it Quasar, name it whichever other, they are going to be careful enough to take, those visitors to the right areas for them to really get to know the countries, the destinations, whatever they're looking forward to get to see, in safety. Because I tell you, Latin America, it's to me, and I have traveled widely throughout Latin America, I've never encountered any sort of unsafe situation. Never.
And
And that is, probably because you need to go wherever nothing happens. And if you go with a good operator, you'll be able to do so without any sort of problem, and you will really enjoy your holiday in the best way, in the best possible way.
speaking as someone that grew up in the United States and most of my family and friends are from the US, when I first went I've been traveling full time for the last 4 years. And when I first sold all my stuff and bought a one-way ticket to Colombia, my family and friends were like, "What, are you crazy? What are you doing? Colombia? Oh my gosh, that's dangerous." And My dad even sent me the State Department has, write-ups for every country, the U.S. State Department. So he copied and pasted the State Department warning into a text message and sent it to me, which basically said, you should reconsider. And about a week or two after I arrived, I thought, man, people in the U.S. are crazy for not coming to visit these places, and I've been full-time for 4 years, most of that in Latin America. And same as you, have never had an issue, never seen anything. I mean, I'm aware that there are dangerous places in the world, but I'll tell you what, Latin America is so different than the way we perceive it when we grow up in the U.S. We grow up in the U.S. and we've got news stories, politicians, a lot of different reasons that people might get on TV and tell us bad things about Latin America. And of course, there have been issues. But sometimes those issues have been gone for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
But we live with these stories in our heads from what we saw in the news when we were growing up. And then we avoid going to places that are life-changing. They have been for me. There's so many times I sat on at a cafe or a tienda, out in front of a tienda in Medellin or Cartagena or something, or Quito. Quito, there's a Mr. Bagel in Quito. Do you know the Mr. Bagel in Quito?
Yes.
That's my favorite. It's not very Latino, but it's like just a cool place. I don't know.
Yes. And, Jason, there are places in Latin America that have actually been discovered by Americans. For example, Cuenca here in Ecuador.
Mm-hmm.
There is about 15,000 Americans who have decided to make Cuenca their home after they're retired because they love how peaceful it is, how lovely the town is. And it's like, I go to the US and I love it. Maybe if I get into the wrong neighborhood in New York, probably I won't like it. But if you go, the whole of the US is just great, it's safe, it's beautiful. And it's the very same thing with Latin America. It's, such beautiful areas. And again, it's so seldom visited, which makes it so attractive. If you don't enjoy crowds and you want, more space for yourself, well, that's what Latin America is all about.
Maybe this would be interesting for people in the US that haven't spent time in Latin America. But there've been many times that I was having a conversation with someone in Colombia about the US and, whether they would go there or not. And they're like, I don't know, it seems kind of dangerous, So these people in Colombia or Ecuador or Mexico, they're like, I don't know if I want to go to the US. I'm kind of scared about it because I hear all these news stories about, school shootings or mall shootings or these things that are horrible things. Of course they are. But anybody that spent time in the U.S. knows
what the press publishes, which is always the bad things.
Yeah. So, and we miss out on a lot of great things when we focus on the bad things. So,
absolutely.
Anyway, thank you for sharing that. We're going to have a link right in the show notes to the website. So whether it's a travel agent, tour operator, traveler, somebody listening, somebody that's just interested in what you guys are doing, not just in Ecuador, but you mentioned also kind of Patagonia, Peru. So I look forward to, maybe we'll come back and have more of a conversation about those places at some point soon. But Dolores, thank you so much for being on the show. Appreciate you. It was
Thank
fun.
you so much for those who listen to this interview. You're welcome in Latin America whenever you want. It's a lovely destination for you to visit.
Well, I'll be back soon. I'm in Arizona visiting family now, but I'm heading back to Latin America myself. Perhaps we'll connect
Keep
over
in
a
touch,
coffee
Jason.
or something when I get there. Thanks, Dolores.
Absolutely.
All right. Ciao.
Ciao, Jason. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.